host Eric Greenleaf, and this is Healing from the Ground Up. Today I'm speaking again with Dr. John C. Warner, and this is the second part of a conversation on green chemistry. Dr. Warner is one of the founders of green chemistry and co-authored the seminal book, Green Chemistry Theory and Practice. He is also the president and founder of Warner Babcock Institute for Green Chemistry and a winner of the last Perkin Prize. John, welcome again.
Thank you.
Today I thought we would speak some about the fascinating topic of biomimicry, which you're also engaged in, I understand. Tell us a bit about biomimicry and how it's employed to make the world a better place.
Well, if someone wants to learn about biomimicry, there's no better source than Janine Benyus, who came up with the concept and wrote the book Biomimicry back in the 90s. Phenomenal book and phenomenal concept. The general gist is that while humans have been toying around manufacturing and trying to make things for a couple hundred years, nature's been at it for an awful lot longer time. And if we really wanted to have a blueprint or a textbook of how to do things, maybe it's not bad to just look out the window and see how nature has done it, because it's just had such a long laboratory process to evolve technologies that are, obviously by definition compatible with nature, because it is nature. And so if we want to make superior technologies, what better source of inspiration and information on how to do it than looking at how nature has solved many of the problems that we often try to solve ourselves.
So, for example, there are bioactive substances that are naturally produced by plants, animals, fish, mollusks, and the like. There are that are effective in human diseases. There are solvents and glues and so on produced. And as I read a little bit about biomimicry on your allied websites, I saw examples that you may wish to speak about systems of organization that are applicable to human life and technology also, like the heating and cooling systems of termite mounds.
Things like that. Well, again, the way that I look at it, there's levels of organization of materials and how things work and are put together. You can look at the wing of a bird. Okay, how is the wing of the bird shaped? How does it do what it does going through the air and everything like that? And say, okay, if I'm an auto designer, can I learn from the aerodynamic nature of the wing of a bird and apply it to the shape of my car, so that engineers can start doing it? And there's rich examples of that, looking at function and form and nature and applying it to manufacturing at the design level. So there's a huge amount of work, and then again, I encourage people to actively pursue the works of Janine and others to see that. Then the next level is, what is the car made of? It's one thing, what is the shape of the car? But then where I get particularly involved is in how would nature manufacture that car, not necessarily what the shape of the car is, but how it would manufacture it. And this is, it's very common for you to hear in the field of biomimicry that, what Janine, I love, she calls it heat, beat, and treat. And what I mean by that is when we in manufacturing make something, what do? We heat it up to high temperature, we put it under high pressure, and we use all these harsh, nasty reagents to make things happen. Okay, that's just what we do. Nature, on the other hand, does everything at room temperature, at ambient pressure, using water as a solvent. So we have been at chemistry for a couple centuries now, and the molecules we can make don't touch the complexity and diversity of what's available in nature. So the structure of the molecules are much more complicated and elegant in nature, but more importantly, nature manufactures everything under pretty ambient, relaxed conditions. And yet humans have all this harsh things. Why? why is it that nature can do it? Isn't that the fundamental question? If we can figure out why nature can do it so well. So here's my theory, this is my epiphany, if you will, is that why do we heat things at high temperature? When you learn chemistry, what you learn is that molecules have unique geometries. Okay, so that one molecule is not just a ball, it has a very complicated structure. When you do a chemical reaction, these molecules bang into each other. And most of the time when the molecules bang into each other, nothing happens because they just bang off of each other. There's a very unique trajectory of approach that is required for the actual chemical reaction to occur. So what do we humans do to make it react? We want to increase the frequency of those collisions so that ultimately the molecules do what we want. So we heat them to high temperature, we put them under high pressure. What I jokingly say is a thermometer is a molecular speedometer. All we're doing is we're heating and pressurizing things to speed things up so that the frequency of collisions happen faster. Now here's the thing. I would argue that there is never a reactive collision in nature. Never in nature do two molecules randomly bang into each other and react. What happens in nature is first the molecules, for what's called non-covalent interactions, snuggle up to each other. And they orient, then they react. And so they first figure out how to get that trajectory worked out, they then react. And I call that non-covalent derivatization. I'm not going to go crazy with this, but so that to me is molecular level biomimicry. If we can look at processes in manufacturing and mimic that process in nature to find a way for those molecules to first orient and then react, all of a sudden we have a higher yield process, we're using less energy, it's more environmentally responsible, and so that's my overlap with biomimicry in green chemistry, is to say we need to learn not only the objects and devices that nature make, but learn from how nature actually makes them.
And what's the equivalent use of water as a solvent as opposed to alcohol or some harsher chemical?
So that's important. Okay, it's interesting though, just going to water as a solvent isn't a panacea to solve all problems.
Sure.
Okay, because sometimes, you know, for a chemical reaction to occur, you want things to dissolve. And one way to have things that are not toxic is for them not to be water soluble. So if you've designed a synthesis to make the molecules water soluble, you've just made it toxic, right? Barium chloride is very, very toxic. But if you go and have any kind of upper GI or something like that, they give you barium sulfate to drink. Why? Barium sulfate is not soluble, and so it doesn't get bioexposed. So if we do things to make chemistry happen in water, all of a sudden now that's not being a panacea. So we better, if we also do that, make sure that they're non-toxic too, because we could inadvertently be solving one problem using water as a solvent and then at the same time making things more toxic. So
it would have to be more efficient and more likely, these interactions, without being forced by temperature or pressure, and also less toxic.
Absolutely.
At the same time. Is that easy to accomplish for
very,
chemists
very
and
difficult.
biologists?
No, it's hard enough. You know, if someone conceives of a product, it costs hundreds, if not millions of dollars to invent and to commercialize that. And obviously it's not that successful. Venture capital has not a very high success rate. People try and fail all the time, and they're not worried about toxicity. If you add toxicity to that game, it becomes that much more difficult. And, you know, we had a conversation in a previous discussion about green chemistry and how that's absent from the curriculum of a chemist. So yes, it is very difficult, and that's where biomimicry comes in, is again, by definition, life supports life. And if you think about it, I feel very strongly that people sometimes think of Darwinian evolution as survival of the fittest, you know, the prey, the predator that eats all the prey, oh, isn't that great? Well, actually, if a predator is over-efficient and eats all the prey, it's not good for that predator. You know, and so it's not the survival of the fittest, it's the survival of the most compatible. And that really what we want to look at is compatibility. And if we can, as chemists, look at success as being anything that is compatible with nature, that by definition is not toxic, it has minimum environmental impact. And so understanding the mechanisms of design at the molecular level so that we can create that compatibility is where we need to be focused.
And what are some examples of a successful application of those naturally observed principles in chemistry or organization? That
I'll give you a crazy one. It's kind of funny, and one example, I would say, Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's disease there are many different theories of what mechanism is the correct mechanism, but one of the prevalent mechanistic theories of Alzheimer's is that proteins in the brain aggregate, and with metals like zinc that causes these aggregations that form what, and these aggregates are connected to Alzheimer's. So at the One Babcock Institute, we've come up with a molecule that disaggregates those aggregates. And so interestingly enough, we've looked at the biological mechanism to either break up those aggregates or stop them from forming in the first place. We're actually entering clinical trials with a pharmaceutical that does that. Now, that's interesting. It's a biological mechanism at the molecular level that we've just discussed. If we think about asphalt, pavement, okay? One day, I have an asphalt technology that we've been working at the Institute. And here's the paint the story for you. So I'm wearing a hard hat, I've got gloves, I've got boots, I've got the shovel, and I'm digging into this asphalt, looking at this chemistry that I came up with, that we've been playing with, and my cell phone rings. And it's some scientists in Finland that are evaluating the Alzheimer's drug. And they're telling me the cognition studies, that the results, oh John, this is so exciting, this is happening. And so let's take a step back. Here I am on the cell phone talking about an Alzheimer's drug, digging in asphalt. Now, what do those two things, to me, they're exactly the same problem. Because what asphalt is taking materials and aggregating sand and dirt to make pavement that needs to have an efficient. So understanding how nature forms aggregates and how to mitigate that aggregation, it's not that dissimilar, once you get down to it, to making pavement. And so the technology that we have to make pavement more efficient using renewable resources and recycled and lower temperature, in my mind, is almost identical to the drug that we've invented to cure Alzheimer's. And so these
and is
two
it,
things,
by the way, is it chemically similar as a compound?
No, it's
different, but similar in action.
It's similar to me in the patterns of taking particles and assembling them together and having them hold and disassemble. Yeah. So yeah, so that would be one example. And again, there are so many interesting examples. Here's another interesting example. I used to suffer from psoriasis, and I have this interesting bad form that it's just the palms of my hands and the soles of my feet. So in desperation, I went and I did, back in the 80s, an experimental therapy called PUVA phototherapy, where I took my hands and my feet and I put them in a UV light box, an hour a day, 3 days a week. 9 months later, I was cured. I have not had psoriasis ever again. But with your hands and your feet in a little light box, an hour a day, 3 days a week, that's a little crazy. So I got into the mechanism. What is going on here? And it turns out that the UV light was shining on the thymine in DNA, and that a psoriatic cell is duplicating fast, a non-psoriatic cell is duplicating slow, so when they dose the UV light, they preferably kill the psoriatic cells instead of the other, because it just, by definition, has more DNA because it's more. So I looking at that and said, gee, this is a really efficient, sadly, this is the mechanism of skin cancer. When the sunlight shines in it does the same thing, and our body has a repair mechanism that removes the damaged DNA, and it replaces it. And every once in a while, it makes a mistake, and that's what causes it. But I'm saying, but this is a super efficient reaction, sadly, from a skin cancer perspective, but for whatever reason, nature evolved to have light react with thymine to do this. So I said, what if I take thymine and put it in biopolymers, take it and put it in cellulosics and PLA, and then take and shine light on that? Well, it turns out the same reaction happens, but now in a biopolymer, it makes a crosslink. It's called a crosslink. It's a photoresist. That's now what printed circuit boards and things like that. So now taking this light mechanism that happens in DNA and applying it to biopolymers, all of a sudden we can make robust materials that are manufacturable but also still biodegradable and compatible with the environment because that mechanism is already in nature at the first place.
So a literal biomimicry used for an industrial and social purpose.
Yes. Yeah. Kind of fun.
Now, on the system-wide levels that we were alluding to, the movement of fluids as around a car or an airplane or a boat, what is another kind of systemic example of biomimicry that you think of?
One of the classic examples is like the lotus leaf and water repellency. That's not a chemical property, but if you look under a microscope, you see this structure that a lotus leaf has, and that the capillary actions of water, when it receives that surface topography, it decides to bead up instead of wet out and things like that. That's an example. And so people have come up with ways of mimicking that structure in a coating or in a surface to make it like that. That's an example. Adhesives. There's a lot of things. We've learned a lot about looking at animals and how they stick to a rock or something like that.
Like geckos climbing on glass and so on.
Yeah. And where green chemistry comes into play is I can mimic that structure of a lotus leaf. I can mimic that structure of gecko, but I can do it using toxic materials and hazardous, unsustainable materials. There is no requirement from a biomimicry perspective. I'm just mimicking biology with another set of chemistry. So green chemistry says that's not enough. We also have to make sure that when we mimic nature, we use non-toxic, environmentally responsible technologies as well. And what better way to do that than using biomimicry at the second order? And so that's how the two go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. And because I'm a psychologist when I'm not doing this, I'm interested in whether there is available social biomimicry. Now, this is a hard topic, but social organization in very intelligent mammals like whales and elephants and so on. Again, I'm thinking kind of systemically. You could, it used to be, and you may even know the referent, there was a architecture book a few decades ago that talked about the architectural structures that were built by indigenous peoples all over the world and how clever they were in their environments, their use of materials, and what you and I would nowadays call their sustainability and non-toxicity. So I was just wondering out into the air about this.
Okay, so you hit a chord with me because, again, this is going to sound crazy, but I refer to molecular biomimicry as molecular psychology.
Oh,
what do I mean by that is that we in chemistry for 180 years have taken the egotistical approach that we're going to make molecules do what we want. We're going to force them together. We're going to make them do this, so that when a product comes off of the assembly line, you can almost hear the inaudible screams, no, these molecules don't want to be doing these things that we've forced them to do. So the moment it comes out of that environment, that manufacturing process, those molecules want to go back to where they were before. So the paints fade, plastics crack. Bad things happen because those molecules don't want to be doing that. We made them do that. So what I say is, why not put a molecule on a couch and say, what would you like to do? And if the molecule looks up at you and says, I want to be a paint, that's going to be a heck of a paint, right? Because it wants to be a paint. Now, that sounds crazy. What I'm talking about is understanding the molecular structure, looking at the hydrogen bonding, the pi stacking, and understanding from take ego out of it. This isn't about me making this molecule do what I want, but discovering what materials and molecules inherently want to do and design products that are going in that direction, that are more compatible with the fundamental structures. Because every time we make a molecule do something that it doesn't want to do, we're adding temperature, we're adding toxicity, and so take the ego out of it. Let's be a little bit more compatible.
And it's not such a crazy idea. You'll be pleased to know that Richard Feynman was once asked about cloud chamber results in atom smashing experiments, and how come he had predicted correctly that the mu meson would be found in the vicinity of some other particle. He said, well, the mu meson likes the pi meson and doesn't care for the for the electron, and so of course we find it there. As though he understood the family relations of the family of elementary particles as they were then thought to be. And you certainly have a feeling for the molecules that constitute chemistry and biology and materials in that way. And I think it's like the question I was asking you at another time about how do you imagine that people or animals found that this plant, say, would be medicinal rather than poisonous. How were cooking processes, the original chemistry experiments, conducted so that people didn't die all over the place? Because to take some tubers and turn them into palatable meals takes tens of steps.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and again, it is daunting to think of time and evolution. We think, my God, I'm 52 years old, I've been around for a long time. Well, humans have been around for a long time, and other species have been around for so long that almost every experiment that you can imagine nature's doing, because it's had a long time to do it. And I think that organisms and things like that have actually experimented, and because of the way that evolutionary forces work, if chewing on this leaf provides a benefit that then allows that organism to procreate better than something that doesn't. So I do think there's been a heck of a lot of trial and error. And
of natural experiment.
Exactly. And so I think that there's this certain philosophy, let's just try it. And where I won't, maybe using the word critical is too strong, but I don't feel we train scientists to have that zeal, that desire to go experiment in uncharted territories. We worship the precedent. You only do experiments that have been done before, and you've only taken it a little bit different, and then you have to get a peer review acceptance of, I'm going to apply for this grant, and a committee is going to decide yes or no. There are no committees in nature. You don't have to go through that process. When things happen in nature, they happen spontaneously, and if they work, that's great. If they don't, they don't.
Well, they're like the old-fashioned chemists, like Hoffman, who discovered LSD and psilocybin, where they would put a tiny bit on their tongue. Or the physician who decided with a very bold experiment that instead of ulcers being psychosomatic, they were caused by a bacterium. So he swallowed the bacterium, got an ulcer, took an antibiotic.
Again, I'm
old-fashioned.
And I see the success there. I'm certainly not going to suggest that people go out and start doing that. Although and within reason there is. But the point though is that there is this belief, the mantra of everything when we talk efficiency is focus, 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 right? And that's what we always focus, focus, focus. Invention and discovery very rarely happens in the focal point. It happens in the periphery. In the retelling of that invention, oftentimes I had this dream and I focused on this thing, when in fact it was probably a bit of serendipity. I was trying to do this and my peripheral vision saw that. Our whole culture, the way that we invest in technology, the way that we fund research now, focus, focus, focus. We're now trained as scientists to ignore anything other than focus. We had a committee meeting 2 weeks ago, and this is what we're looking for. Bad chemist if you're looking to the left or to the right. And invention and discovery happens in the left and the right. And so I feel that our whole inventive process, our whole culture of venture capital and science funding is so much worshiping the precedent that it's handcuffing us to have less capability of doing anything new and different. And the problem is, if we want a sustainable future that is non-toxic and environmentally benign, that's not going to be by the precedents. It's going to be leaping out of the box and doing new things. And I'm not so sure we have a culture that survives.
Or let's say identifying, as you said, John, identifying existing evolutionary experiments that are already at a pretty high level of success are non-toxic, or the organisms would have died off while
By
experimenting.
definition compatible, exactly.
So
yeah.
it reminds me that in previous cultures, there was a direct attempt to imitate, in shamanism, to imitate birds, animals, plants, and to learn from them, to have them be totem animals, protectors and teachers, because they knew things the humans didn't. Their eyesight was keener, their smell was better, they knew the medicinal plants, they would come in dreams. You know, of course, the famous story that Kekule developed the structure of the benzene ring by having a dream of dancing figures. Have you had any such experiences?
I don't know. I think I may be in a perpetual dream state, and I'm not sure of it. But yeah,
that's thinking at the periphery, as you said, when instead of focusing, you're kind of half dreamy, and you speculate, and then you're eating lunch, and you're doing an experiment, but there's, oh, look at that thing. I think is what you're describing.
Yeah, it's you know, not growing up, perhaps. You know, and having that childlike enthusiasm of every shiny object, and just wanting to stop and admire and smell and touch and squeeze and see the beauty everywhere, and that's where it's at.
Our grandson, when he was 4, one day said to me, "Grandpa, you always have to have plans for fun." and that's how I feel talking with you, that you've got a lot of plans for fun, and you're ready to roar on this stuff.
Fun.
52 and 5 may not be that far apart.
I don't think. A lot of people will agree with that.
So it's been delightful again to talk with you about these really life-preserving and life-promoting ways of doing science, industry, and education, and discovering more about the natural evolution of the family of molecules. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for viewing. You can find John C. Warner online at
so you Google, like, the Beyond Benign is a good
Beyond
website.
Benign.
Or Warner Babcock Institute.
Or Warner Babcock Institute. We hope you join us again in the future. I'm Eric Greenleaf, and you've been watching Healing from the Ground Up. Thanks for joining us.